Good evening and welcome everyone to the Township of Chatham Township Committee meeting. Albert, you want to introduce the folks? You want me to just introduce Mike Tobia?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Tonight, representatives of the potential developer of Meeting-Dixiedale are here. Their attorney, Douglas Henshaw, and their planner, Michael Tobia. Both of them have appeared before the planning board and made a similar presentation when the planning board was reviewing the ordinance proposed for introduction tonight. So with that brief explanation, I'll turn it over to Mr. Henshaw.
You want to use the handheld?
No, I'm going to try to put it on this.
Oh, okay.
Just put it here right in front of me.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, committee members. Thank you for having us make this presentation tonight. This is a presentation we made to the planning board not long ago regarding the Meeting-Dixiedale site and the proposed rezoning. We've kept it in the same format for consistency. We thought it'd be good for you to see exactly what they saw so that there's no question that we're all on the same page, if you will. Michael Tobia is our planning consultant. He's going to give the presentation, lead you through. We'd be glad to answer questions either as we proceed or at the end, your choice. It's not a problem either way. And I think that's, without further ado, I think we're going to get started.
Need a minute to get set up, so.
And we've got to warm up a little bit, so.
Phil.
That's going to be
So you said this is a presentation that was previously given at the planning board
indeed.
several weeks ago,
Indeed.
October 19th.
It was. And the slides have not changed. The content's not changed. I'm wearing a different tie.
Fantastic. And I guess just for residents here in the audience, as those watching at home or the replay, this video will be obviously online, as with all of our prior meetings, if you want to review it again. So try to fill some airtime here while this thing warms up. All right, settle down. It'll all be clear. Here we go. If you guys are, you want to take over?
So is this
Yes, it should be on, Mike.
okay. So sorry about that little delay. Some people call me the home of technical difficulty, and you see why now. This is, in fact, a presentation we made on October 19th before the planning board. We're going to repeat it before the Township Committee tonight, exactly as it was presented before the planning board. You all know the Meeting-Dixiedale site located between River Road on the south, Hillside Avenue on the north. This is known as Block 66, Lot 1. And all the photos you're going to see were taken on October 4th. When you look at the site from an aerial perspective, you will see the mansion, well-known mansion at the center of the property, Hillside Avenue running along the north of the property, River Road running along the south. Because of existing vegetation along both Hillside and River right now, it's really hard to see the existing mansion. You got a particular vantage point with your car stopped, you can generally see through some hedgerows or trees and see the mansion. The mansion's up on a perch. In general, the property slopes from Hillside southward to River Road. To the south of us are developments such as Chatham Glen, Sutton Woods, Heritage Green, all of which, when added up, combine to provide 900 units of housing for the community. They were inspired and initiated by affordable housing litigation now going back well over 20 years, is my recollection, perhaps as much as 30. Okay, but this is a dominant land use in the area, all to the south of us. On the site, if you have driven past the hedgerows and the trees and you come in from the driveway on Hillside Avenue, you approach the front of the house. It's a rather lovely mansion with great bones to it. It is in a state of modest repair right now. The proposal before Chatham Township is to save this building and restore it with a number of significant renovations and alterations, but in general, the idea is to restore as much of what we call the skin, or the facades of the building, as we can. The proposal would end up with a clubhouse on the ground floor of this structure and 4 apartment units on the second and third floor. Second floor is shown thus on slide 3, and the third floor, which will require some renovation, where you see the 3 dormers.
What year was this built, do you know? What,
100 years? 100 plus?
1916?
100,
Give or
like I
take.
said, 100 years. You know, it's an old home. Okay? We flipped around and walked up from River Road and looked at the home from River. And here you can see some of the slopes on the property, as well as some of the major assets, including the sunrooms that flank the main building left and right. That's slide 4. As you go into the building, and now I'm on the front yard patio facing River Road, in the background of this is actually Chatham Glen. You can see a bit of it, but the views up here are spectacular. And the idea of this building and flanking new construction would be to maximize the view shed looking southward over the valley. Not all buildings on the property are in great condition. There's a greenhouse that would be removed. This is up near Hillside Avenue. There's a barn shown on slide 7 that would also be removed.
Mr. Tabaya, do those buildings have historic significance or nostalgic only?
Yes, I think, first of all, I'm not a historic expert.
Right.
Having been through them, I think you would more safely characterize them as really old rather than historic.
That's a technical term.
Yeah, and we don't see value in saving them.
Got it. I know that it's been asked among people who are residents and people who grew up here, generations going back, obviously, and they talk about seeing those buildings, and it's, you know, it's nostalgic more than anything, I suppose, then.
I think that's what it is.
Right.
Unlike the mansion.
Right.
Okay. And speaking of which, it's a good segue to now go with slide 8 into the building. And you can see some nice assets. In this shot, you know, I photographed the foyer, the staircase, some archwork. This applicant's intent is to do as much restoration of the building, meaning saving existing features and fixing up as is reasonably possible, while still understanding we have to modernize this building for both housing and a ground floor clubhouse amenity. If you go into the living room of the building, you see some high ceilings, some nice crown molding, fireplaces, great windows in seemingly every room on the first and second floor of the building. The building, as we conjure this up, and we've not done architectural plans yet, but many of the partitions will be coming out in favor of structural beams and a very open floor plan that the marketplace seems to desire these days. The sunrooms are real assets to the building. Here's one, and we intend to make these part of amenities for the clubhouse and common area of the building. And now let's go to the concept plan for a second, more than a second. Hillside Avenue, folks, is on the top or north of the illustration. River Road on the south or bottom of the illustration. And the mansion that we've been talking about is shown thus. The proposal that we seek the rezoning of the property for would be for 54 duplex units. We're broadly calling them duplex units, which would mean mostly 2 units smushed together with a common party wall down the middle. In your ordinance, we could also call these townhouses. That's more semantics than anything. They would be high-end units of 2,800 to 3,600 square feet apiece. These are rough numbers. I want you to understand we do not have architectural plans finalized. The price point that we've provided in the past is roughly 1.2 to 1.5 million per unit. This is luxury space. It's what we've looked at as empty nester space and what we'd call move down space, meaning the folks who have had 4 and 5 bedroom homes on a couple of acres and want to downsize now with kids out of the hospital, out of the, it's a Freudian slip, with kids out of the home and in college and moving on with their life. It's those parents, those households that now look at 5 bedrooms and say, I don't need it for kids anymore, I don't need a backyard, I don't need a swimming pool, and that's the target audience here. The mansion, as we said, will be saved and will contribute 4 different types of housing to the site, which will broadly be like apartments with lofts. Okay, they will be in that building with a clubhouse. There will be a major patio amenity outside the clubhouse, looking south over River Road, like we said. There may be a kind of a dipping pool on that patio as well. These are amenities we're still trying to work out. After a lot of back and forth with the town, we understood value and we agreed with it to provide a trail through the entire site. If you follow the pointer on slide 11, you'll see a meandering trail that we've sketched out. Comes all the way down to the back end of the property. I understand there's linkage to an existing trail, I think just northeast of where our trailhead would be. This would be, if approved by the township, secured with an easement probably, so it would be open to the public. This would not just be an amenity for residents of the property, although they would be allowed to use it also. I wanted to talk a little bit about access. This is a property with a lot of slopes on it. Most of the green space you see, such as in the southeast corner of the site, and nearly all the frontage along River Road, we've stayed away from because of slopes. We will still need slope variance relief when we get before the planning board. We did not feel it suitable to amend your slope ordinance just for this one property. Nevertheless, we've tried to keep all the development as best as possible off of the heavily sloped lands. That means access to Hillside Avenue only. And what we've done is provide 3 separate cuts to Hillside, one for a cluster in the northeast corner of the site, a second driveway in the center portion in the main cluster of the development that would lead with a really nice approach dead center up the road to the mansion. Kind of just like where that driveway is now if you've been out to the site. And then we would have a third cut called Road A for a cluster of units south and west on this site. This is only a concept plan. I think you all know it's non-binding on the township, but we've tried to move this along a little bit in terms of details to make sure the zoning ordinance would work and let you know that we've considered some other things. One of those other things is emergency access. So in addition to the 3 driveways I just showed you, we're proposing emergency access points along Hillside. These would not be open to the public. We'd probably drop a curb along Hillside. We'd probably put up a fence with a lock on it, fire department only or police only could get in there. And if there was an emergency, for example, if a tree fell across the main access point, we would have a secondary means of access into each of the nodes of the property. And if you were looking at this closely, you would see dotted lines into 3 other points on the site. That will be looked at closely at the time of site plan review before the planning board. We'll eliminate those emergency access cuts. We'll alter them, we'll move them, whatever we think is best when we really get into the weeds on this thing. Okay? As you can see from this, we tried to shade some of the major green areas. It's in everybody's best interest to save all the existing plant material on the site if we can. We have looked closely at and made a commitment internally to saving the hedgerow along Hillside Avenue to the greatest extent possible. This is a really nice rural feeling road right now. We want to keep it that way. We think that's in the best interest of both the applicant as well as the community. So that's the concept plan. Architecturally, the applicant has built a similar community up in Connecticut, Darien, Connecticut. we wanted to share with you a few images of that very quickly to show you that what's going to be proposed architecturally will be a traditionally styled project with a lot of very Chatham-esque building elements that you see on a lot of single-family homes throughout the town. Here's one image of the Connecticut product, steeply pitched roofs, a lot of white trim, window grills, clapboard exteriors. Here's a zoom of one unit up in Connecticut, and you can see the draft ordinance, incidentally, will require either a patio or deck on every one of the new units. Here's one with a little covering, some column work, brick chimney for accents, a couple other nice shots of exteriors. Architecture has not been worked out, but we know the value system of town here. We're going to work really hard to meet local needs in terms of architecture. Interior shots speak to just the high quality nature of the job. Here you have a barrel kind of vaulted ceiling in a master bedroom. Kitchens, Carrara marble and stainless appliances. This is kind of a really nice product kitchen that you see in a lot of higher end development now. And I think that gives you a good idea of the development. The ordinance before you now, and I don't have the number on it, Doug, but we've done a lot of technical review with your staff. I think we're thinking of calling this, Mr. Banish, Zone R6C, is it? It was patterned after your several other multifamily residential zones in town. We borrowed freely from your other zones on topics such as building coverage and impervious coverage to make sure we did not reinvent the wheel, but we used standards that were already used in this town for development such as Rose Valley and Melrose, I want to say Melrose Place, I don't know what that is, Melrose on Green Village Road. This is proposed, including the mansion units, at 1.78 units per acre over this 30-acre site, making it the lowest multifamily density in the town, pretty comparable to the Melrose project, okay, in terms of elbow room between buildings.
And for our residents, the Melrose property is the one by right, correct?
No.
It's behind ShopRite, across from the Oakville Field.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Used to be the Heil Roses site, if you remember that.
Okay.
Okay. So down Green Village, Mr. Mayor, and then there's Garden Apartment Complex right there, and Melrose is the next left after that.
Gotcha.
Okay. A very small number of units in there. Okay. What I wanted to tell you, we'll go back to slide 11. This is an example of what planners would call cluster development. Rather than spread things out all over the whole site the way you might do with single-family development, we tried to cluster units away from the slopes, away from the woods, and into the areas that are generally flat. We're still going to work with your slope ordinance and get some variance relief, but we tried to cluster. And Hillside Avenue was the way to kind of move it up in that direction to the north to honor the site.
Would you mind providing just some background on the developer themselves, who they are, what their experience? This is not the first time it's not their first rodeo, obviously, and.
No, Sterling. This is a collaboration between Sterling.
Use the microphone, please.
I'm sorry. This is a collaboration between Sterling and Sun Homes. Sterling is based in Livingston. They've been in business for decades. Have built hundreds of projects. The one that is most familiar to you would be Rose Valley. It was built in this municipality, I guess, beginning maybe 10, 12 years ago.
That's the one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right off Turnpike. The other unique thing about Sterling is the broad diversity of the products they've built. They have built apartment buildings, single-family homes, multifamily townhouse communities. They have a wealth of experience. The Sun Homes component is a gentleman named Bob Dale, who has done work in Connecticut. The product that you saw in these slides is one of his jobs in Connecticut, and that's served as a bit of a model for us in terms of size, shape, level of architectural detail, and the price point that we're seeking to achieve here. So this is they've collaborated on other projects, but this is the first one in Northern New Jersey.
Great.
We're talking about builders with a large staff of in-house professionals with thousands of units and homes built over the course of multiple generations.
So from their experience, when they say that this is geared, it's $1.5 million townhouses, the demographic that typically would look at these sort of homes would be empty nesters. I mean, they say that from experience, not just.
It's from experience, and also obviously studying the community and knowing the community from the Rose Valley experience. They've also built substantial projects in Morris Township and lots of other places in Morris County. But their experience and the studies combined lead them to the conclusion that Chatham is the right place. The quality of life of Chatham, of course, is really what drives the bus.
Sure.
So this is, to give you a quick demographical tutorial, this is all baby boom stuff, okay? The baby boomers now are, so the youngest one is 53. Okay, oldest one is close to 70.
Thanks.
This, and so these are folks that have raised kids, got the big houses, and we see tremendous demand for downsizing. And downsizing doesn't only mean a smaller house. In some cases, it just means downsizing in terms of maintenance responsibilities. Meaning you don't want to cut your lawn. You've been doing it for 30 years, okay? And you don't want to rake your leaves. You don't want to shovel your driveway. And so you get into a condominium form of ownership, and also with amenities on site and like-kind households. That's what this is mostly about.
So resident concerns that we're going to have an influx of families of 5 moving in here, impacting the school system and such and such and such and such.
They're all empty nesters. We looked at, incidentally, and it might have been
Please quiet down.
might have been Mr. Banish's suggestion, but we counted the number of school kids coming out of Rose Valley. I think you have 56 units there, so it's very comparable to this. And with all those units, we counted 6 public school-age kids coming out of the development. Normally what you find, too, incidentally, is those 6 are probably in their last year of high school, and they're about to embark on a college pursuit. And so those units are usually empty the next year, but 6 out of 56 is a microscopically low multiplier.
Great. And could you speak to the open space?
So the open space, again, I'm having technical difficulty here. I don't know. We're going to try and make do with the image we have, but the open space under your ordinance is required at 40%. That's measured over total lot area. What you're seeing here is actually an open space estimate of about 70%.
How much?
70.
70, okay.
Right. And again, this reflects clustering, and that means everything not paved or built on with a house would be green space and have an asset to the community, whether it's big woodlands or a trail or just a nice yard behind the house. So we're well in excess of the 40% requirement, which is a pretty aggressive requirement anyway. So we'll be well above that.
And what was this concept plan? Do you have any estimate how long that walking trail is itself?
I don't have that number.
Okay. It looks pretty long.
That's a nice long.
Yeah.
I walked it. It probably took me strolling it a half hour to get from the northeast corner to the southwest corner.
Nice.
Not like speed walking, but strolling it took about that long.
Great.
And that's a nice
Very
path.
scenic.
Along River Road, it's really nice. And coming down off of the eastern edge is really a great view shed because you're looking out over a trail that's gradually going down. So looking south, you have a really nice view.
And the connectivity to the hillside trail seems to be ideal as well.
That was, we were directed to do that
Yeah.
over a year ago. I imagine we're gonna end up with a crosswalk on Hillside to do that, but that's what we do before the planning board is ironing out those details.
Great. Any questions from the committee? Mike?
I guess I'd like to start off by saying thank you very much. I mean, I think you can tell from the attendance tonight that this is considered a very special property in town, and clearly you're approaching it that way. So I think the chance to really talk about something at the conceptual level and, you know, get input into it from the community's end and get your logic and approach explained again at the conceptual level, I think is a rare and valuable thing. So
if I may, Mr. Kelly, it is rare, okay? I make appearances before governing bodies maybe once or twice a year, whereas we go before planning boards and zoning boards every week. So this is normally something we do at the planning board level. You ask for it here at the governing body level, and we're obliging. Okay.
I think this is how it's supposed to be done, actually.
well, we appreciate it. And I mean, the approach that strikes me as impressive is the priority to save the mansion. I think that's a plus for the community. I think that the numbers we've hammered out for open space, I think are an asset for the community, and I applaud you on that, and working forward on that. The trail, I think is a real plus. You mentioned the priority on preserving the hedge, and I've always considered that one of the natural wonders of the town, so I definitely would reinforce that. I guess on that front, I don't know if that's totally compatible with the idea of the emergency access going through that area. It sounds like those are two things that are going to bump heads.
We got to balance that, you know, and so we do that at site plan. Because every time you want an emergency access cut, it means some of that hedgerow has to come down. And we'll work all that out as best we can.
So, I mean, I definitely would express the desire to you and to our planners and planning board members that as we go from concept to reality, that would be a personal preference.
We're on the same page with that.
Okay.
Anyone else?
I'd be interested in kind of a clarification of the term clustering. It sounds like the developers are viewing this as a cluster development. How would, and I guess I'm a little bit confused about our ordinance that we're drafting and we're on the table to be introduced tonight, calling for 40% open space, which would be a factor of clustering. But then you're describing 70%. I mean, is the green lawns between the individual units, are they going into the 70%?
Yes.
So when you talk about open green space, that's what you're talking about there. I guess I'd like to speak out in favor of the slightly different concept of clustering, which would be the uninterrupted green space, which is part of what the advantage of the walking trails would be, and part of what would be a big advantage to the environment with some of the wildlife and the habitat. They're not going to be all that likely to thread their way between buildings, but they could thrive in some of the wooded areas, the bigger chunks of wooded areas.
So
So
generally,
Mike, get the mic.
I want to generalize, the bigger the open space parcel, the better, for so many reasons, which is why you see a big chunk of land over on the southeast side of this. And then we have to balance, too. Our trail, as I said, runs along the easterly boundary and all the way along River Road, all the way out to the end. It works with the site. And also what it does is not exactly have our trail cutting in between units and onto the private roads and creating privacy issues. We want to talk to you a lot more about this when we get to the site plan phase, but we think this is really working out really well.
Yeah.
Like I said, it will be an easement in favor of the community, in favor of the public, so it'll be a shared facility. And I think we have a pretty good vision. Might have to fine-tune it a little bit, but I think that's going to work out really well.
So, I'm sorry, Mike. I was just going to ask, do you know the percentage of that Obviously, 70% of the entire site, but the clustering of the green trees there, what is the percentage of that site? Do you know, roughly?
We can get you that calculation.
I was just curious if you...
We'll get
Oh, just of the wooded area, yeah. So, it looks like, obviously, maybe a third.
Yeah, it could very well be. That's a 30-acre site you're looking at in total. We'll get you that number. That's pretty easy to lift up.
Mr. Tobias, I'll tell you, when we talked to the folks, two of their biggest concerns, and I know we talked about this at Planning Board, professional traffic studies have not been done yet. But we can fully appreciate the fact that we're throwing 50 new homes here, and there are, there's a residential neighborhood to the north, obviously our condominium community to the south and to the east, and River Road and Hillside can get congested during school hours, during commuting hours. It's a great concern for the people who live there. And they are, the folks that we talk to have spoken to each one of us, and they speak among each other. And certainly the residents of the Heritage Green and Chatham Glen and Sutton Woods communities are tremendously concerned about the traffic, the impact to traffic. If it's not commuters and it's not school-age children, maybe you can allay their fears a little bit, but if you've got 50 new homes, it's a concern.
We will certainly have a traffic expert and analysis done on site plan, which is the traditional, typical way that's done. And I think what we're going to find, based on the experiences that I've had working on other jobs analogous to this, is that you don't get a lot of people running out of the house between 7:30 and 8:30 in the morning because they're at a different point in their lives, and maybe they're going to the gym, but they're not going off to the office and going to be in the same rush as everyone else. I think it tends to have more of a spread of traffic rather than a concentration early in the morning. Same thing with school, lack of school children. I mean, maybe the school bus goes by already, but we're not going to have a bunch of parents driving their kids out to schools.
Right.
It's a different dynamic. But
right.
We have the professionals we've worked with before on projects like this. Mike and I have actually done studies on townhouse communities. We looked at every townhouse community in North Township, for example, and counted all the school children, public school, private school, and all the rest, and came up with some pretty surprising numbers on the dynamic that occurs at this level of housing in terms of both lack of children and the differentiation between the trip generation.
Right.
There's still trips. It's not the same time as you
right.
might expect.
Yeah, and it's going to be hard to guarantee that, but I think the folks who live here are extremely concerned about that. So when you can reference traffic patterns, reference what goes on at Rose Valley,
Sure.
coming out over by Ace Hardware, and talk to them about what kind of, there's 2 exits there. There's one onto Green Village Road, there's one onto Shunpike, and what kind of congestion is created there. Certainly some of us, Kevin, you commute that way to work when you go to Morristown, and to see what experience that actually is.
We will do that.
Yes, we will go through that entire exercise.
Sure, for the sake of comparison. Right. And the additional, the other concern we hear about, obviously you've heard it many times, is the impact to the schools. You can tell us that's not the demographic, and yet people are still concerned that you're going to have 50 new homes and 2 children per home. Obviously, parents with 2 kids are more likely to buy a house with a yard in a neighborhood where there are other children. And I know you can't guarantee that to our folks, but that is something that obviously they're greatly concerned about.
So, if 50 single families were put on this lot, this tract, I think we have 100 kids. That's a pretty documented, well-documented metric as well. But there's such a big difference between what a single family home provides and what townhouse-type living provides. And we looked at Rose Valley, and we'll look at it again because I think now we're one further school year into the cycle. But these are the empty nesters.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at what you need when you're raising kids, such as a big backyard, you just don't have it here. We have a lot of data on that, including state-level data
right.
that link public school-age kids to townhouses and apartments. We can provide you with a lot on that, but we really do want to assure you that this price point and this style of home just don't encourage children to move in.
Right. I mean, I get that, and I've seen it, and as I referenced at one other time, my mom lives in a place like this. You're not going to find a basketball court, a pair of roller skates. You're not going to find a bike. You just don't,
Right.
because they are, moving toward their senior years, and kids just, you're not going to bring your kids to a condo community of that sort. So those are the concerns that I'm hearing. And I know you can fully appreciate that. You can fully appreciate the folks being concerned about the impact to their neighborhood and to their schools.
If I could follow up on that traffic question, and I guess it really, it picks up on what you said before about balancing different things. If this was a site that didn't have some of the steep slope problems that you're trying to deal with, would you design all the driveways on Hillside, or would you be likely to drive, kind of put one out on River Road somehow?
I think River does not work because of the slopes going down.
That's the problem?
If we didn't have slopes all over this, we might very well have only 1 or 2 access points into the site rather than 3. And we haven't done that sketch because we know we have slopes.
Mm-hmm.
So the curb cuts we're showing you are reflecting topography and
Right.
where we know we can make cuts.
I guess,
Michael, I think you're right. If this were fairly flat, you'd probably have one street on each.
yeah,
on each.
yeah. I'd hate to see the township's steep slope standards result in a less desirable plan. And since we're talking at the concept stage, and we're talking with our planner in the room and with the representatives of our planning board in the room, I guess I'd just like to express the desire that as this concept moves forward, that you express clearly what can be done or what would be the most desirable in the way of access points, and that our planners try to be as receptive as they can, because it is a balance between the desirability of not infringing on steep slopes, but then also the desirability of controlling traffic and flow and the other desirable factors that come out of that. So I would say that's, and on the same point, the clustering, the location of the buildings. I would hate to see the clusters spread out into what could be open space any more than they had to, because you're trying to abide by what we have in black and white as a steep slope ordinance. I mean, certainly, I'm not saying ignore the steep slopes, and I think our planners wouldn't do that, but if it comes down to being a question of where we bend, I'd hate to have everybody walk away from here and saying, gee, we could have had a better design if we had taken a tougher look at steep slopes and thought about how we can address that problem rather than avoiding the problem by just doing something less
We
desirable.
totally agree with you. And we're not going to be careless about steep slopes, but if we have good ideas that make it a better project and we need a slope variance, we're going to ask the board for that.
And I think the point you make there, Mike, is that you are asking for a variance in certain instances. And just to clarify, Mike, so you know, in the preliminary stages of this discussion about the project, it was expressed to the builders, that very sentiment, that we see so many builders who come forth, usually on single-family lots. Obviously, we don't have projects like this every day, thank God, but we have seen people try to go to any length at all to avoid the variance, so they can just come in with a clean application and be done with it and move on, and that's not always the best idea. And we did talk about in the preliminary concept, and obviously this is not the original concept. There was an extensive retaining wall that was originally looked at that really was unsightly. But the point that you're making and the point I'm making is that I agree with you, and that you have to not be afraid to ask for a variance if it makes more sense that you're coming up with a better project and a better overall development. So I think it's a point well taken, and I think it's been looked at, and I'm sure it will continue at the planning board.
Anyone else? Again, I just want to express my gratitude for you guys coming out tonight. I think the fact that you just said that typically you just present before planning boards instead of governing committees, I think it's reflective of our interest for our residents to be as transparent as possible in terms of this development, as well as not only our residents, but I'm sure many of the people in the audience here tonight are from the borough as well, who have some interest in this property as well. So I thank you again for coming out here, providing insights into the project itself. I'm going to ask Albert, if you can, just for the audience and residents, people watching at home, help everyone understand the role of the committee in this process as well as the role of the planning board.
I will do that, Mayor, but I have a couple of brief questions that I think will lead to that direction.
Great.
Mr. Henshaw, you described the developer. What's the relationship of the developer and the property owner?
It's a contractual relationship. My client is the developer, and we have a contractual relationship with the owners of the property. And this is one of the more unusual ones I've participated in, because the insistence has always been that the owners want to have a say in the design of the project. They want to make sure that the mansion is, at all possible, safe, and they have frankly resisted approaches made by other developers to create a much bigger, denser, more project with more units, and have elected instead to proceed in this path. And that's pretty unusual from my perspective, because someone else might pay them a lot more money than my client plans on paying them, because we're getting less units, less density, but they consider it to be a better thing for the town. They have a multi-generational history on this land, and it's very, very important to them. And it's unusual from my perspective.
And the reason we're here tonight is what? You've made a rezoning request.
We've made a rezoning request, and what I would characterize this as a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach by the township. Instead of saying, you know, we're not going to rezone it, file a use variance application, take your shot, whatever you might want to say. This municipality is elected to learn about the project, understand its implications for its citizens in the town, and then engage its professionals to look at it closely and try to come up with the best possible result. And it takes longer, but it's going to be better in the end.
And although you spent a lot of time discussing the concept plan, if this ordinance is introduced, does that mean this concept plan is approved?
No. Oh, that'd be great. We'll be back for a building. No. We are many, many meetings away from this. And I think that's an important point. For the people here in the public, this is the first step in a long, long process that we have to go through. But we will be back, were this to pass, we will be back in front of the planning board on public notice hearings that the public will have an opportunity to come out, review the plans. There'll be, I'm sure, an intense and regular recurring dialogue between John Rushke, Frank, and all the professionals of the town in terms of making sure the project serves the best interests of the community at large and minimizes the effect on the neighbors. We've got a long way to go in terms of hearings and notices. I think the chairman wants you to describe a little bit more in terms of where we're going next in terms of the ordinance, the protocol. I think let's do that. I think it's
No, I'm asking for your help because I think it's important that these issues, that you not only explain them, but that I also explain them, because the responses will in essence be the same. But the concept plan does not mean approval of that concept. And what is on the table tonight is a zoning ordinance, which is a blueprint or an outline of what is permitted in that zone.
Indeed, that's correct.
So, Mr. Mayor, the process is the first step. This is really, although this has already been before the committee when the developer made the initial rezoning request, about a year ago, perhaps a little longer, you referred it to the planning board for study and review. The planning board looked at this development in the context of a re-examination of the master plan. It did so. the developer came back to the planning board and presented this concept in conjunction with the proposed ordinance. The purpose of the concept plan is to conceptually demonstrate that the ordinance will potentially result in something like this. It doesn't mean it will result in this concept plan, but it lays the foundation for you to not only see the words on a piece of paper, but also see what conceptually could be built there. So tonight, if you so choose, you're introducing an ordinance, which is a procedural motion tonight. It is not a substantive vote on the ordinance. Although the public has heard a presentation from the developer, although the public will be allowed to ask questions in the next session of the meeting. If you decide to proceed forward, it's a procedural vote, introducing the ordinance and really placing the question before you. Public notice is given of the hearing on this ordinance, and then there is a hearing on that, and approximately a month from now if you decide to go forward. And at that point, there is a formal public hearing. That procedure is no different than any other zoning ordinance that comes before you. Once you introduce it tonight, if that is your pleasure, it is referred back to the planning board. The planning board reviews the ordinance and makes a determination as to whether or not, and this is a technical term, whether or not the ordinance is inconsistent with the master plan. Instead of saying that the ordinance is consistent with the master plan, the phrase in the municipal land use law is it's an inconsistency determination that the planning board makes, and it reviews the master plan in relationship to this ordinance. The planning board would then refer it back to you and indicate it's either consistent or inconsistent with the master plan, and then you can have your public hearing and vote on it. If the planning board determines that it is inconsistent with the master plan, you can still move forward with adopting the ordinance if that is your pleasure, but you have to have a detailed resolution explaining the reasons why you are not following the master plan. So the planning board plays a very key role in this, and if the planning board said inconsistent, you could still move forward, adopt what is referred to as a reasons resolution, which explains all of the reasons why you're moving forward. Once that ordinance, assuming it's adopted, then it becomes law, or it becomes a valid ordinance of the town, and that the process then again starts again. If the developer chooses to go forward with designing what is provided for in the ordinance, they go through a design process, typically called a site plan, and they would return to the planning board for the normal review that the planning board makes on any site plan and subdivision application, upon notice to all of the residents within 200 feet of the property, and the planning board goes through that hearing process, and that hearing process will entail testimony from typically planners, site engineers, traffic engineers, and anyone else, any other professional that the planning board deems is necessary in order to make an informed judgment on the application. So although this looks like this concept plan looks like it's fairly well along in the process, we're really at the beginning of the process. And throughout this, there will be public hearings that will be held here on the second reading or the public hearing for the ordinance, and then at the planning board as that application is presented to the planning board. And obviously before, and this was alluded to, before the application is made to the planning board, there are reviews by the planning board professionals, again including the planner, the engineer, traffic consultant. There are, in addition to this, stormwater management calculations and plans that are presented to the planning board, stormwater plans that are detailed, indicating where the drainage goes and how this site addresses the drainage. So it is the comprehensive review that is had on any similar application, no more, no less. And tonight, although there's been a lot of focus on the concept plan, you are not approving that concept plan. You can't. What you have is, you're acting as a legislative body, and a legislative body adopts an ordinance, which is the words to which make the development potential present.
And ultimately, it's the planning board where everything's worked out, as it were.
Correct. It's the plan, and again, you as a body legislate.
Planning
That's-
board figures
that's
it
what
out.
That's what the ordinance does. It's a piece of legislation. The planning board does all of the detailed work along with its professionals. So it's a lot of the questions that you were asking. I was tempted to say that to you, but I didn't, because I think it's also important that you hear these explanations. But a lot of these details, as was said, it's a concept now. There's a long way to making that concept a reality on paper, and then a reality if the planning board chooses to approve it.
Just two other questions after this conversation. You said the owner was approached by other builders. What's the potential for that property in terms of number of units that could be built?
Well, I think I would probably interrupt you there and say, I think that's speculative in nature. I think what has been expressed here is a desire of the current property owner to maintain the value in the property in this terms of the historic nature of the building, or the historic appearance of the building, some of the vistas that have been described in terms of the clubhouse and the openness of the trail. So I think it's probably unfair to ask the applicant, or certainly to speculate on
From
it.
our planner, in terms, I just want residents to understand, 54 units might seem like a lot. However, what we could be facing is X number of units, is my point.
Well, again, as I said, I think that's speculative. I think you deal with the proposal that is before you, and I think that's the best course to follow here.
All right. The other question I would have is, no one has a crystal ball. Would we have any idea as to when shovels in the ground on a project similar to this?
I'll take a stab at that one. My best guess would be not this coming spring, but maybe the following spring. I mean,
2019.
Yeah,
And that's a guesstimate.
of course,
Yep.
it certainly is, but we have, a project like this takes easily 4 to 6 months to go through the planning board process, at least. And we have other issues to deal with as well. And you don't build in the dead of winter in New Jersey most years, because the ground is close to freeze as the last couple times. It's just a guess, but it's down the road quite a piece.
Okay.
And there's also a design period.
Yeah, well, I mean,
How
building
long
in
it-
that design period,
Right, how long does the design period take?
Somewhere between 100 and 250 days.
And then on top of that is,
Then you start the process.
process before the planning board. So there is a design period. The concept is not a design. It's a concept. Then that is put together, a formal application is made, and then the reviews start by the planning board and their professionals.
Great. Any other questions?
Frank, you've been awfully quiet. I know you didn't come here just to sit there and look handsome. You've had some important things to say to us. I think your perspective as a professional planner, having seen things like this happen across the state, I think you've got some valuable insight, if you can comment on it. I mean, for us who have been involved in the process, we've heard some of your opinion, but I think the folks would be very interested to hear, given your area of expertise, if you'd be so kind.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I assume part of what you're talking about when you say my area of expertise relates to the fact that I work for the court as a court-appointed master in affordable housing matters. The proposal that we have on the table here is unusual, to say the least, in that ordinarily an attempt to build some affordable housing as part of a housing development would look to maximize the potential yield from the property. So that typically you'd have someone here asking us to rezone the property for minimally probably 10 units per acre or more. So we'd be looking at a 300-unit plan, and it would deliver something like 45 to 60 units of affordable housing. In this instance, we're talking about 54 units that are going to produce 24, at least, affordable units on an off-site location. That ratio is very fortunate for the township because it's obviously much less demanding than it would be to accommodate all those other units and the pupils that go with particularly the Mount Laurel units. So I think we're fortunate that, number one, we had a property owner whose idea for the property had a legacy intent and that they want to leave a legacy that they can be proud of. We have a developer who actually thought that that made sense to them too, and that's really the unusual part here. And we had a township that, in attempting to meet its fair share obligation, became somewhat creative in using a variety of assets that we have, including an off-site opportunity for development of affordable units. That means that there's a light touch on the hillside here and affordable housing closer to the center where all the services and those types of things are. Seems like a pretty good idea.
Frank, if I could just ask you, certainly use the 10-to-1 ratio. What's the highest you've seen in the state?
Settlement agreements are being routinely reached at densities between 15 and 25 units per acre.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
And this is 30 acres.
Right, this is 30 acres.
So what's the quick math on that?
I don't know.
All right.
Anybody else can do it.
Very good. All right, gentlemen, well, thank you very much again for coming out tonight and providing us your insights into this proposal. Thank you, residents, for listening as well. As I said, we're going to put this video online as well, extrapolate this one portion so people don't have to listen to the entire 3-hour meeting tonight, but just this one section, and encourage you to talk to your neighbors and friends who might have interest in learning more about this to attend the future planning board meeting. If it's passed this evening, the introduction will be at our December meeting, and to continue to follow this as it progresses. So, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
We're now going to open up for hearing of citizens. This is an opportunity for any member of the public to be heard about issues which are not topics scheduled for public hearing tonight. To help facilitate an orderly meeting and to permit all to be heard, speakers are asked to limit their comments to 3 minutes. If you come forward, please state your name and where you're from.
Alex Tayo, 288 Hillside.
I think at this point, comments should be made to the meeting.
Sorry.
I actually wished I had left the slide up, but I guess it's too late for that now. I know it's a bit of a lopsided where we have a long presentation from one side, and then I think a bunch of people in the audience want to give their own 2 cents. I know not everybody can have as much time as the developer, so I'm going to try to respect that as much as possible. But I do have a number of points I want to quickly touch on. And my goal here really is to help craft the zoning ordinance as best as we can for the township. And I definitely respect the seller's rights and respect what she's doing to kind of help the town out and not do as much as she possibly could to monetize value. There's a couple of points that were mentioned today that I want to quickly touch on. One of which is the phrase, the dominant land use in the area is currently townhouses. It's very true that there are a condo development just south of this property, but that's not the dominant land use on this particular area of Hillside Avenue. It's single-family homes on relatively large lots. There's a very wooded, nice cemetery just down the street. There's a hiking trail just across the street that developers talked about. It's definitely not the dominant land use for multifamily housing on this property. In fact, the developers described it as a rural-feeling road. That's very true. It is a very rural-feeling road with the big trees that are there and the hedge lines. Once you start poking some holes in that hedge line, you're cutting down the big trees, putting big multifamilies up, it's definitely not going to be a rural-feeling road anymore. And one other point I make is that the comment about the 1.78 units per an acre, that was discussed at the planning board meeting as a net versus gross number. Because of the clustering, when you're actually looking or in the townhouse area, it is much denser. That larger number includes the green space and the 40% that was set aside. So one other just couple of comments I want to make not directly on the Dixie-Dale rezoning, but there's another ordinance in the, posted online, bow and arrow hunting. The comment I want to make there is it restricts certain zoning areas. It lists them by name. I think 2-6C or B6C, whatever this zoning name is not listed there. So my concern is how many other town ordinances refer to zoning by their codes like that, and well, it should be updated at the same time that this is introduced or passed. I feel there's a risk of inconsistency in the various ordinances the town has passed, either historically or at the same time, that don't refer to the new town zoning area. I noticed there was no restrictions on the size of units or the amount of parking. There were minimums set, but no maximums. So while the ordinance says 54 units, by my reading, there was nothing restricting those units from each being 7 bedrooms. Now, I don't think that's the plan, or having 6 parking spots each. So that'd be my concern, that perhaps if the developer is saying, I'm only putting in 3 units, or with 2 to 3 parking spots, why not codify that just so what they presented today, which is very much non-binding, is closer to the zoning ordinance that the town is now looking at and considering. Also, with the green space quoted at 40% in the zone, that was described as deed restricted. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how much of a restriction or protection that is. I would like some sort of a conservation easement, and if the developer is offering 60 or 70% green space, I think the town should take them up on that offer. The township would say, that sounds great, let's make it 65% green space, either deed restricted or conservation easement. I think that kind of strengthens up what is actually being introduced today with what the plan we were shown was, and brings them more in sync. So I'm just trying to move very quickly here. I know I'm probably over time. In terms of cutting the roads on Hillside versus River Road, the plan presented today did have one cut on River Road already. That was kind of a backup access. Is there any strong reason that that road couldn't be reversed? And then I would also say, in terms of other access points on River Road, for anyone who's gone to this property and picked out Christmas trees, it's great, by the way. I recommend you do it while we still can.
Well, I might recommend actually the fire department has a Christmas tree sale, and maybe you can support the fire department.
You can get 2 Christmas trees. There is an entrance road that you can see when you're picking out a Christmas tree off River Road. It's a little run down, the gate's crooked and rusty, but there is an existing access point on River Road already. Now, I have no idea how frequently it's used, but that seems to suggest that it is doable. And to Mr. Kelly and Mr. Sullivan's point, I think that'd be great if we could look at maybe restricting the slope ordinances a little bit, turn the plan around, get those entrances on River Road, which is a much more appropriate road. That road does have the look and feel where the dominant use is townhouses and condominiums, while Hillside Avenue, the dominant use is single-family homes and woodland trails. So I very, very strongly ask that we get that in the ordinance, because again, what actually matters is the zoning rules. Once those are set, as long as the builder kind of follows them, I think there's a lot less ability to push back and manipulate. I think right now is when we'd say, let's have no entrances on Hillside, or only emergency access on Hillside. And just echoing that also on the hedge, the language in here protecting the hedge only talks about maintaining the existing hedge. Clearly, let's say we're 5 years down the road, the hedge has died of natural causes. There may not be a requirement to protect an existing hedge if it no longer exists. I might have some sort of landscaping rules in there to protect the sightlines from Hillside Avenue, above and beyond the existing hedge that, who knows what will happen over the next few years. Also, I want to I'm giving a lot of feedback on this. It was only posted to the website a few days ago. So there's not a lot of time for anybody to give feedback before it is introduced today and we've given back to the planning board. And I think the opportunity to change it once that has happened is much more limited. So you're probably going to hear from myself and a lot of other people today comments on suggestions or tweaks, or because we have a lot more eyeballs on this now than we have. So I would really recommend maybe not introducing this today, but taking the feedback and having maybe a little more iterations with the community at large. So finally, maybe the third rail that no one's talked about yet, or only talked about very briefly at the end, the affordable housing. I totally understand that the reason that this is being looked at is because the township has an affordable housing deficit that needs to be met. This, as written, allows that 24-unit affordable housing to be built on the Dixiedale farm. I know the understanding is it will happen at the skate park location instead, but why are we putting that option into this rezoning? If for whatever environmental or other reason the skate park falls through, well then we want to revisit the whole package. Maybe it makes sense in that case to keep this as single-family houses. And I know the question was, well, okay, how many units could you cram into this? Sure, you could fit 500 units, but not as it's currently zoned. Under the current zoning, I've heard 15 to 21 houses, and that's probably without taking into effect the variances for the slope. We can see in the clustering plan, not all of this is buildable land or optimal land. A lot of it is very steeply sloped. A lot of it doesn't have great access. So if you build 15, 16 more single-family homes on this property as it's currently zoned, you're not fixing the affordable housing requirements, but you're not making it worse. So I don't know why we have to have the option to have the affordable housing on this land. And my final point, I know the risk is a builder's remedy lawsuit, that we don't do this, the builders walk away, and the lawsuit, something like Toll Brothers sues and says, no, you have to zone this for affordable housing. I know that's the risk. I just feel that that's why I want to make this plan as great as possible for the community, and I really appreciate the seller working with the community and your work as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sue Hogue, 76 Canterbury Road, down in Briarwood Coach Light at Chatham Glen, not just Chatham Glen. Chatham Glen is all 4 condominium associations, including one of an additional 100 units that is Vernon Grove, that is also affordable housing. So we have 1,000 units down there, and 1/4 of the households in Chatham Township are already in the total Chatham Glen community. So you have a major voting block, you have a major interest block of the homeowners down there. I will say that the gentleman that just spoke and the presentation that was done here today answered most of my questions. I think the only thing I have a concern about is unfortunately, if DEP does not approve the affordable housing on Southern Boulevard, what happens to this ordinance? It changes, it seems to me, all the details in that ordinance. You go from 54 units to 78 units. You don't know whether you're going to have a 3-story building like you have planned on Southern Boulevard brought to this location, if they're going to do additional duplexes, or if they're going to have quadruple plexes, whatever. So it has this little statement in the ordinance that this is all predicated on the zoning for affordable housing and the approval of affordable housing on Southern Boulevard. But I don't understand what happens with this ordinance if that doesn't get approved. It seems to throw it up in the air, and perhaps the attorney can answer that. I don't know. But that's my questions, and I thank for the presentation because it really did answer a lot of my questions. So thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Arlene Driscoll, 145 Terrace Drive. I'm another resident of the overall Chatham Glen community, which is in the Chatham Township portion of the areas that we're discussing. And I've been to a lot of planning board meetings. So we've talked about the traffic issues. We've talked about the rural road. We've talked about really trying to maintain that sense of uniqueness that is Hillside. However, I do want to express the concerns of everyone that lives in that Chatham Glen area of the proposed traffic that will be coming down Hillside onto River Road, and the magnitude of traffic that will cause, And the prior gentleman, where I understand his perspective, he wants no traffic on Hillside. We too want to minimize the traffic on River Road because it does create a great concern for us and our communities. So I think there does need to be a strong balance between both sides. The other point is also around the deep slopes. I understand that is a concern. And since we are all downhill, we would be very concerned about the water implications and such of coming down deep slope. I'd also like to know, the gentleman had mentioned that the property itself reaches 70% open space, and I think it was Mike or Kevin that asked, of the real green area, what percent of that, what is that percentage? And I know the gentleman could not answer it tonight, but I think that would be a very relevant question to have the answer for that. Does that truly meet the 40% requirement? Because he did mention he thought it was about a third. And my last point is the gentleman, when he was talking about the barn and some of the other pieces on that property, of the assets on that property, he just said that they're old. And so I'd really like that to be investigated. Are they historic pieces, or are they just an old barn that can come down? I don't think he was an expert in what is historical property to be able to make that determination that they're not historic and valuable. So we'd like that considered as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I could just address part of that. The barn structure is obviously the last standing barn outside of Green Village, I'll say, of the four great farms that made up Chatham Township, this property being one of them. And it was discussed in an effort to save the barn. Having been in there, the barn is old. It's big old barn beams. We did review or talk about the potential to change that into a residence use. And it was felt by the builder it would be extremely difficult and costly. So it was, I think, a business decision. I can't speak to the historical reference, but it's, because I thought it would make a great house. But yeah, so it was discussed. I can't speak to the historical reference, but it is, it's a barn. It was a working barn, so.
Good evening. My name is Ursula Hartwig Flint, and I am a resident at 234 River Edge Drive, which is part of Sutton Woods. As of November 5th, I've lived there for 25 years. I'm an original owner. My concern about this development is an ecological one. There is a pond, a natural pond. There's a lot of underground water, as you probably know, in that area. There's a natural pond up on that property by Dixieland. There is a pond that comes straight down. If you draw a line straight down that hill, there's a pond on Heritage Green in that development, and then right straight down in that line, there's another pond down by Sutton Woods in our development. And then I would assume that water then drains into the river. What I want to make sure is that, somehow that the building of this development does not disturb that underground water and dry up those ponds. And from another ecological standpoint, when you start to take down all those trees, or many of those trees that are up there, what is, as was mentioned before, what is that going to do to the drainage? We are at the bottom of that hill. What's that going to do in terms of drainage water? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Michael Chidlovsky. I'm at 302 Hillside Avenue, second house to the last, basically at the border of the township. By the way, thank you very much for working and making the space that's currently on the other side of Hillside Avenue, Green Acres, a really nice walking trail. Me and my 3-year-old and 18-month-old, we go up and down that trail. It's beautiful. That road is nice right now as well. So our concerns are, as many people here in the borough have echoed before and probably will in subsequent meetings, is obviously traffic and preserving the look and feel and the nature of that street and that neighborhood, and of course property values. So one concept that was brought up at some point, I forget who brought up the idea of making Hillside Avenue a cul-de-sac at Woods Lane. Basically, I wanted to make that known here again. I'm not sure if you heard of the concept. That could potentially alleviate a lot of concerns that we have with all entrances being on Hillside, because now we're talking about more cars up and down that street. Making a cul-de-sac raises possibly property values, or at least it will balance things out when there's a large development now that shows up next to my house. So I wanted to make that known. That cul-de-sac could be done in such a way that first responders could still get through if there's a kind of a closed-off way to still go through that. So I wanted to make that, raise that here again and for consideration. Another thing about $1.2 to $1.5 million, there's probably, 3 or 4 houses within quarter mile of where I am in that area, about 1.2, 1.3 that are still on the market. They have not moved. They're on large plots. They're very luxurious homes. They have better kitchens than some of the pictures we've seen. So the concept of 1.2 to 1.5, although that could be a target segment, and they could be telling us that what we want to hear is that this is the kind of community we're hoping to build. Next thing you know, all the families from Hoboken come in and they come to the school system. That's why we're here as well. So I wanted to make sure that while you guys are reviewing the zoning, take a look at that, and potentially, if we are talking about targeting that community, put age restrictions. Is it maybe a 50-plus community, or make certain things like no basketball hoops, no playgrounds, etc., specific, so that it kind of makes that a little bit more restricted. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Bob Hander, and I'm from 99 Huron Drive. I just wanted to ask one question that I maybe it wasn't here for it, but I came in while we were discussing or while we were listening to the discussion of the assumptions about how many people are going to be coming in, probably that they're going to be baby boomers, et cetera, all of which I understand sound generally right. The only part of the equation, though, that seems like hasn't maybe gotten the right amount of attention is where they're coming from. I mean, to the extent that they leave one neighborhood in Chatham, move over to that one, then of course they're opening up a spot that then somebody else is going to fill, presumably in that case not a baby boomer. And I didn't really hear any kind of assumptions made about what percentage we expect of the 50 some odd homes that are going to be filled in Dixiedale that might end up opening up spots that are, bringing in families with kids, and what that might impact the school loads and everything like that. So to the extent that that's something you still can do and still can put into the study, I would suggest that we go ahead and look at that too.
Great, thank you.
Hi, my name is Sue Ligertwood, and I live on Heritage Drive. I live in Heritage Green. I, too, was a resident at the Averett Estate. I was a renter for 8 years, so I know the property very well. So if you have any questions, Sam shared a lot with me, even though he was a very private individual. So I just wanted to share with you that his family came to this area shortly after the Civil War. And the original carriage house or barn that you're referring to was originally a dairy farm. And within that barn, I would ask, there's a cornerstone above the laundry room, and it has 1866 or something. I think it has a date on it. And there's also stalls within part of the barn. And I would ask that the township, when they do decide to tear it down, that they do take certain artifacts from the property and give it to the Historical Society to preserve the history there, because it definitely is a historical to the town. Second of all, some of my questions may refer to the the site map that they showed, and I had questions about the dark green areas indicated. The dark green areas gave you the impression that those were all trees. On the very sloped area, those trees are mostly for the Christmas trees. So my question would be, would those remain there, or are they going to plant other trees other than that for wooded areas? And then my other question was about what did the green ellipse areas on the site map indicate? They never talked about that. So, and what were their plans for that on the concept? Then I had a question regarding who provides the engineering, traffic, and water survey. Is it the town or is it the developer? Because it was confusing because the developer sounded like they were going to do their own survey, but then the attorney said that it implied that it would probably be the planning board's responsibility to provide that. So I'd like that to be clarified if possible. Again, the road on Hillside Avenue is very narrow currently, with 2 cars going by. People do speed on that street, and it's very difficult for 2 cars to pass. There's a guardrail on the one side, and my question then is, if this plan does go forward, who pays for widening that road? Because I really don't see that it's going to be... It will probably need to be widened, and then, of course, you'd have to take into account 2 sidewalks that would probably have to be added for to that area. Okay, there has been a lot of discussion regarding the traffic on River Road and also on Hillside, which I greatly understand, but there has been very little talk about the water issue. And having lived on the property, I know for a fact that the open space area where the 2 tenant housing used to be that was torn down by the township, the water would run off of Fairmont Avenue and run into the kitchen of that shack and flood the first floor on a repeatedly. So that is a really great concern of my residents in Heritage Green and how that will impact us coming down the hill. And also just so that you know, that pond there right there on the corner of, as you go up Hillside from River Road, that is an underground spring. And there is drainage through Heritage Green underground that fills into our pond, and our pond is really not really a pond. It's a water basin. So those are a lot of concerns of my neighbors and residents, and I think that's about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Laura Jones, 177 Hillside Avenue. I echo all of the comments and requests that have been made before me, but I just wanted to put some more definitive asks on the table. In Ordinance 2017-15, Section 2K, I would ask that stronger language is used to not only increase the amount of open space that is deed restricted, but perhaps put some more definitive language around future development restricting that. Right now it says that it's managed by the homeowner association, which puts a lot of control into the hands of a non-governing body and a private owner. And I would think that as the township, you'd want to maintain a bit more control over what happens to that open space to prevent future development. In same section 2N, the developer's obligation to provide affordable housing. Right now, my concern is that this language is almost written as a foregone conclusion that the affordable housing will be on this site. There is no mention to make our best efforts not to locate on this site, or to do our best efforts if they do not fall onto where we currently plan, which is the skate park, to find an alternate location and using this site as a last resort. So that would be my recommendation, is to strengthen the language there to do everything possible not to increase the density on this site, as it is not only our wish as residents, but also the seller's wish for the property. These are more of the pipe dreams, but, you know, considering the youngest boomers were stated as about 53 years old, that is still very much a working age person. Retirement age is going up, and those people are still going to be leaving the property, regardless of the age of their kids, probably to go to work. So I think kind of separating out the traffic is the other obvious main concern, separating out from children in the school system. People at 53 years old are probably still leaving the house during normal business hours and coming back during high traffic times. So just kind of keeping that in mind. I was kind of curious, Karen, not to pry, but is your mom in an age-restricted development? My, kind of call out on that too is having grandparents that age into age-restrictive developments have provided a lot of social infrastructure, and it's a very community-like feel, and that is also something I think that's, from a marketing standpoint, very desirable to people that want to age in places to be surrounded by like-minded people, I guess, life-staged people.
If you don't mind my chiming in,
Yes.
I'm perfectly happy to share my experience.
Yeah.
My mom lives in a place on Woodland Avenue just past St. Hubert's, Giralda, on the way to Morris Township. It's called the Moore Estates. And over the last couple of years, I've had friends move in there who are my age, and I am 57. So now you're looking at my mom, who's in her 80s. Her neighbors are in their 60s, 70s, 80s. No children in the entire place, except for maybe, one 20-something child who hasn't gone out on her own. Not one. The folks that I know my age are wondering what brought them there, because they feel like they're the youngest people in the place. And these are very lovely high-end, not as high-end as these. But I think when you look at the demographic of where my mom is, it really is for those older people who have sold the big house, and that's what my mom did. She sold the big house we grew up in. Everybody, many people in that area are the ones who sold the big house. They just didn't want the lawn maintenance. They really didn't want to worry about shoveling their driveway, etc. And I see it happen in places. So I really don't think it's, I don't think they're telling us just what we want to hear because we want to hear it. I believe that's actually their demographic.
I don't disagree with you, but I would it would be nice if we are all so confident that this is going to be what it's going to be, if an age restriction would just be placed upon it. It just seems like no one wants to put their money where their mouth is on that. Again, I don't know if that's something that goes in this ordinance, but...
If you age restrict it, I still have a person living at home.
Absolutely, but they're not in the Chatham school system. That's all I care about.
But
I don't care about
people are waiting longer and longer to have children, so I don't want to have too much back and forth with you, but there are people who are 55 with school-age kids now. So even if you said 50 and over, 55 and over, you're talking...
Yes.
An age restriction's not going to...
If people are going to pull their kids out of school to move to age in place and do it all at once, then I agree. I'm just throwing it out there. I believe that are all my comments. I just also want to echo the points of Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Kelly, that can we really explore alternate ingresses and egresses to this property. Let's just split the load and be good neighbors. Let's not put all of the burden on the Hillside Avenue. Let's not put all of the burden on the River Road. Let's just do what's right for the property and just split the difference. People are going one way and they want to get stuck at that light on Hillside, more power to you. If people want to go up Southern Boulevard, people are going to go where they're going to go, so let's just make it easier for them to get where they want to go. And then finally, I also want to just support that and back that up with a letter. I won't read the whole thing, but was written by Leonard Resto, who is a councilman on the borough, to Kurt Ritter, CCing myself and Anna Marie Strand and the honorable members of the Township Committee to just report that numerous residents on Hillside Avenue in the borough have contacted the borough of Chatham and him specifically with regard to the development proposed for Dixiedale Farm property. They are concerned, as am I, as the impact traffic would have on their neighborhood. I urge you and the developer to strongly consider amending the plan to accommodate the valid concerns of our borough residents along Hillside Avenue. So just wanted to read that and formally introduce that into the record, that we have engaged the borough council as well, and we are very open and willing to have constructive discussions and be good neighbors with you, and we wish that you do the same, and we appreciate the efforts you've taken so far. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Did you happen to attend the meeting last week with Mr. Hoffman and the mayor, Mayor Harris?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to clarify something before I make a statement. I have recused myself from any discussion on the planning board, where I've been a member for a number of years, because of property in another location which might be impacted one way or another by the affordable housing. So having said that, I want to speak as a private citizen, which I've been told I have the right to do.
And who are you?
I'm speaking as a private citizen.
And who is that?
Bailey Brower, Jr. of Driftway, 17 Driftway. It's very fascinating, a little bit of history for you people. My great-grandfather sat in Kurt Ritter's chair, not here, when Mr. Averett came into the township in around 1912-13 and bought a property from a farmer that was referred to as owning the barn. Averett engaged an architect who has did work for the Washington's home in Virginia. And this, if we could look at this mansion, this estate house, this is a gem. There are very few communities that have a house of this nature, and whatever we can do to maintain it or keep it is absolutely a treasure for the township. Now, having said that, the Averett, the heirs of the Averett have their concept to have this property not heavily developed and to retain the estate home is absolutely a personal sacrifice to them, because if this property developed into 300 or 400 apartments or housing of this nature that could, as you heard earlier, produce children for the school system, this would be a major impact not only on the area down by the River Road, the pretty condominiums that are down there, but the township in its entirety. So when Mr. Averett, Sam Averett and I, again, the family goes back so long, the grandmother's, grandmother and great aunts were friends of the Averetts. I'm a fellow alumnus with Sam, knew him very well, been guest in his home a number of times, and I knew he had a love for this property and the area that is part of his farm and historical significance. I mean, 1910, 107 years, right? There's a history going here. The thing that I want to caution you about is any builder today with the kind of money that this type of development comes up with has a plan, he has a program, he has other places to place his money. If the interest rate goes up in the picture of the country overall, the impact to the developer can be tremendous based upon his original plans. There's an imperative here to do something with a builder who can bring such an asset to this community. Now, having said that, I want you to consider the alternatives. For those of you that are here from Hillside Avenue, you shouldn't be concerned with this property being developed with 54 units. What you should be worried about big time is the 350 to 700 low-income housing that Chatham has put on your border. And no one said a word about that. That's your worry. If that's developed for the proper, it's zoned for that, and Chatham has parked that on the side of Chatham Township, it is a menace. I speak as a resident and a property owner and a taxpayer, that scares the bejesus out of me. Now, get on to the development. Again, you're going to have every chance in the world to come before the planning board and talk about your concerns and what has to be. The property will be explored in great detail, and I can give you a personal assurance, having sat with the type of quality people on these boards, that your interests are going to be followed. There's no exchange of money between hands of officials. There's no greasing of anything here. Everyone is working for the benefit of the community and its citizens. From what I've seen and the development I've seen in the town, this is one of the last 2 or 3 properties remaining of this size. This is crucial to the quality and the continuation of what we love and appreciate in our town, the Chathams. And I'll incorporate the Chathams because anything that happens within the communities affects us both. This is an imperative. I can't tell you how important it is and how we don't want to get bogged down in minutia and small details. We have a competent engineering firm. I've seen him work, and believe me, he works in the interest of the town. You heard what the planner had to say about the quality of this particular development. He's seen very few like it. We are blessed that we had a family that wanted to maintain this tradition, wanted to maintain this concept, wanted to continue our town, and the type of government that you have that will see that it's done right. I urge you to come positively to these meetings, add your constructive comments, and consider the issues that concern you. And I think you'll find it worked out. It's not a question of this property being developed. It's a question of when it's going to be developed, how it's going to be developed, and the type of quality that you'll find in a development. And I think you've got all of these things going for you. And I could not be more thrilled to have sat with the Averetts and been a part of having this thing progress and known this wonderful family that has this tradition for us. So on that basis, I hope I've made some kind of addition to the conversation tonight. Thank you.
Hi, Tracy Ness, 31 Jeffrey Court in Chatham Township. I'm interested about this natural spring that's on the property. Has there been an LOI done by the DEP on the impact of the property and what the buffers are on that property? And when was that done?
That is a planning board detail. This is a concept plan. That is an issue that is properly raised by the planning board, and if a letter of interpretation is needed to determine the boundaries of where construction can occur, that is part of the normal planning board process. This is a legislative process tonight, not an approval process.
No, I understand that. But given that this deal
But you
was
want an
struck...
answer to a question that cannot be answered because that is not the issue before this body.
Okay. Given that this deal was struck almost 3 years ago, and the planning board has had this before them, I guess the developer said about 1.5 years, was there any discussion at the planning board that any of the committee members are aware of that has brought to their attention about the natural spring, or that the planning board has discussed needed to investigate this spring, whether there are buffers associated with it, since we're now going on almost 3 years?
I'm not quite sure what you're referring to about 3 years, but
I was
last...
that Tom said at the last meeting.
No, what was said at the last meeting was that 3 years ago, there were discussions between the township and the Har family to acquire that property. Subsequent to that, they've gone in a different direction, contracted with this developer, and this developer approached the township to rezone that property. When that was done, the township referred that matter to the planning board for review and consideration. The planning board has been worked on this for the past year, and now it is before the township committee after those reviews. But the request is a rezoning. It's not for approval of the property, so you are asking well ahead of that process.
I just didn't know if if the committee was going to actually vote to rezone a property, that there would be information had before about whether there was an historic resource, an historic inventory been done on the property, an LOI on the stream buffers done on the property, because I would find it difficult to make a decision on rezoning if you hadn't met with the planning board or had these discussions with the planning board about what the nature and the essence of the property is before it's actually rezoned. Maybe it's a different process, maybe.
That's correct, it's a
So
different process.
you would
This is
rezone it first and then figure it out?
No, this is a legislative process that says this is what may be permitted to be built on there. May be permitted. Doesn't say it has to be permitted. That's why you go to the planning board, and that's why you have a quasi-judicial body, not a legislative body, that acts on that application.
My second question is, are we deficit in our affordable housing complement right now?
That is still an issue that is being resolved.
Not our future complement that's being before the courts? Are we deficit in our current complement? So then there's no need to develop this property in order to get affordable housing?
No, that's not the correct conclusion to reach from that first question that you asked. We do not have a deficit from prior rounds. We have a credit. We built more or had more built than we were required to.
Correct.
Those credits presumably carry forward into the third round. But we will still have a third round obligation, but that number is not yet determined.
No, we don't know that.
We don't know what that number is.
We don't know if the 24 will help it, or if it's going to be 54.
Well, it'll certainly help it. It won't hurt it, will it, Tracy?
No, but we don't know what the number is. Last question. Has there been any precedent in the courts that will allow affordable housing to be built separate from a development? So in other words, you have a luxury development going up, and you have an affordable housing complement going on.
Yeah, it's not unusual
and
for it
then
to be built
separately,
off-site.
you're putting affordable housing by the gun range and the DPW. Is there any concern that the committee might have that the courts would be not willing, since we're having such difficulty getting our housing, and I know you guys are fighting very hard to get our affordable housing complement down as low, but
I know you're a former reporter, but you should try not to editorialize when you speak. It's a long, complex process. But Tracy, we've been down this road with you already, answering the same questions.
I have not asked this question before. My question is this. Will the courts look upon favorably separating the affordable housing complement from the existing development? And is there precedent in the courts to do that, to say it's separate but equal? You can move it over to the DPW and the shooting range while having a luxury townhome here.
The police department. It's not a shooting range.
Well, isn't there a shooting range there?
It's a police department.
There's a shooting range that is a police department?
There's a shooting range at the police department, Tracy.
Thank you, I know that.
Try to,
Thank you, I know that, Kurt. I've lived here a long time, but I appreciate it.
Don't try to grandstand.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Back at you.
Does anybody want to answer the question?
Yeah,
about whether
I'll
the
answer the
courts-
question. Well, I will just say this, it is our affordable housing zone that was designated so.
Correct.
So many years ago. So in light of the fact that that is our affordable housing zone, you would expect affordable housing to be built there.
Well, we would expect it, but it's a
I-
reasonable question, because courts, I don't know, have considered, maybe they have, maybe you can answer this question, but is it precedent to separate the affordable housing component from a development and put it in an area that is not the greatest of areas?
You're dealing with an obligation, and that is the responsibility of the town to meet that obligation.
So we don't know.
No, that's not true. What the town will eventually have an obligation, and then it is up to the township to come up with a plan to meet that obligation. How it chooses to meet that obligation is a policy decision for the township committee.
And would that need to go before the court?
Yes.
Thank you.
If I may, Tracy, just to finish up on that thought, okay? Because in the prior rounds, there certainly have been many developments where the affordable component was off-site and in sometimes even out of town. The township's first round plan included a contribution to the city of Newark to construct affordable housing as part of our approved plan, approved by COA.
Yep.
And that was not at all an unusual arrangement. It was common.
Yes.
And it is a common practice for the affordable housing units to be built off-site. There's also a provision under the rules in prior rounds for a monetary contribution. If the developer couldn't
Yes,
put it.
correct.
So you know that. So why are you asking these questions then that you know the answer to?
Because I believe that the Fair Share Housing Coalition, and the reason why we're in this litigation for so long, is that they're no longer offering those offset credits, and they're no longer allowing you to sell your housing obligations. Am I correct in that? Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Again, that was by way, regional contribution agreements are no longer permitted by law. It has nothing to do with the Fair Share Housing Act. In 2008, there was a legislation that was adopted that took away from the law or deleted from the law these regional contribution agreements. So we're confusing many different things here. And the purpose of this discussion is, again, whether or not the ordinance should be introduced tonight.
Thank you
Albert,
for the
may I just,
clarification, Albert.
Albert, can I just ask you, there are many, many instances, even in our area within stone's throws of here, where affordable housing units are separate, are in different neighborhoods, in different parts of town. There are, I mean, I grew up in a town like that, where you just, you put developments in places where there's zoning for it.
You can have inclusionary developments or developments that are purely market rate. And
Exactly.
But it is the affordable housing obligation that you have to address.
Right.
And how you address it is for you as a governing body to make
Sure.
that determination.
But you make these decisions based on your land availability, you make these decisions based on a lot of different things.
Correct.
If you want to put certain portions of development in one place, you do it.
It's perfectly permissible.
Thank you, Albert.
I'll be very...
Mr.
No,
Mayor, I'm sorry.
Excuse me. Before a same speaker speaks a second time,
See if anyone else.
make sure that no one else wants
That's
to
what I was gonna
speak. And that's also assuming if the chair wants to allow a second round of comments. So the question is, if someone else has to speak or wants to speak, they should do so before same speaker speaks a second time.
Did everybody hear that? All right, thank you.
Good evening, thank you. I have a quick couple of comments. Robert Bowker, I live at 214 Hillside. My concern is the traffic, and I understand about the people who live off of River Road and their concern, but my concern is I live on Hillside. And I know that coming off the top of that hill, coming down to River Road, the sight line is pretty quick. So you're having 3 roads coming out of this development onto Hillside. My concern there is the safety of the people who are using Hillside and the safety of the people who are coming out of the Dixiedale development onto Hillside. I'm not familiar with the slope aspects of things, but to me, the River Road thoroughfare is certainly able to handle that. And if the slope works, and the developer obviously did not want to spend the money to make sure the slopes work. I get that. They want to make their profit out of the development. But I think it would be safer if the traffic went to River Road, not on the hillside. Possibly a red light there would help alleviate some of the safety concerns of people getting in and out of that development. My second concern is a little bit about the development goes through. They have 54 units now. Could they develop additional 30 units into the property as well? That wasn't mentioned tonight. And obviously, if they own the property, they probably could come back to you and say, hey, this thing's been successful. We want an additional 30 units. Those are my 2 main concerns. I appreciate the gentleman giving the historical perspective on the property. I never met Mr. Averett, and I'm sorry that the time has passed, but what a beautiful piece of property and an asset to the community. Thank you.
If I may, I think I can answer the second part of your question. The property, the undeveloped portion is going to be deed restricted against any future development, and the bulk requirements limit building coverage to 15% of the site and impervious coverage, which includes roadways, sidewalks, et cetera, to 30%. So that's the limit of the development that can take place. And so I don't think that after 54 units are built, there's going to be the ability to add 30 more in the future, even if the zoning allowed that.
Joe Bezralian, Fairfax Terrace. I'm also chair of the Open Space Advisory Committee. So, and I just want to say that this community and this committee and past committees and this administration cherishes its open space. We can see that in the history of our township. 6 years ago, the Township Committee, administration, and the community preserved the 17 acres that Mr. and Mrs. Averett sold right across Hillside. 2.5 years ago, this community, this Township Committee, preserved the 130 plus acres of Giralda Farms, an extraordinary achievement, Herculean task. Can't say enough about it. Right now, as is public, almost 8 acres are being preserved just across what's called, we call it Snake Hill Road, but Southern Boulevard, where it meets with River Road. Another really skillful achievement. This community cherishes that. So does this Township Committee. And the way this diagram looks, it looks like the owner and the committee also continues to cherish its open space. So I can't say anything negative about this. I'm not opposed to development. It breaks my heart when beautiful land does become houses, but I understand it, and it's important, and we're growing as a society. There's one thing that does give me pause, though, just to keep, is that the developer said that diagram represented 70% open space. Well, if that's the case, then that diagram represented 30% development, which means that they could come back to the planning board and show all those units spread out over double the area that is shown on that diagram. I mean, in theory, they could, and still leave 40% open space. I don't think the planning board would want to do that. I don't think anyone on this committee would want that. And from the sound of it, I do not think that the owners of the property, Mrs. and Mrs. Har, would want that. I don't think that's what anyone envisions. So I'm wondering, is it worth it just to make the planning board's life a little easier? Just instead of saying, that's how we're defining open space, the alleyways in between the houses, if that's how we're defining open space, then can we just introduce it in 2 weeks and say 60% required open space? I mean, because we don't want to give the planning board a really, really difficult job and have to, divine it. I think we all see that diagram, and there's not a ton of pushback against that diagram. There's that big green space. And I'm kind of in favor of that. I'm kind of okay with that. We do have other opportunities to preserve open space in the township going forward as well. That's probably my strongest thought and consideration after hearing everything that everybody said. So thanks for your thoughts.
Thanks, Joe. And we spoke a little bit earlier, so I knew you were going there with this, and I'll say to you, for everyone else, basically the same thing I said to the previous speaker. The development is limited to 30% impervious coverage of the whole site. That, by definition, means 70% of it is undeveloped. Now, whether that's spread out a little bit more than what you saw clustered here or not, that's the reality. 70% of this site will be undeveloped with pervious surfaces. It may not all be contiguous as a nice big green field or all clustered forest, but it will be 70% undeveloped. And I don't know that we can do better than that.
I just wanted to mention that there are steep slopes on the property, and so they will likely be having to come in for a steep slope variance. So if they do expand the development and widen it and make it wider, that's just going to exasperate their variance that they're going to ask. So when they come to the board and if they come with a drastic different plan, the planning board can deny it, because they could look at options of the steep slopes and try to minimize the steep slopes. And I think what the concept plan that they presented right now does minimize the steep slopes, and if they do try to change this concept plan, they're going to be hard pressed to demonstrate that there's not other opportunities to minimize that steep slope. So although it is a concept plan, they are pretty much tied to some extent to this concept plan.
So to answer, sort of to speak to Joe, if they start spreading out the actual buildable area, whether it's impervious or not, okay, great, so now you've put 30 feet between each duplex instead of 15 feet between each duplex. Now you're looking at the big map, but instead of having the homes just here, now you've decided to put the homes here. And now you're creeping out into that big green area that we look at as just trees. So now instead of having your homes here, now you're having your homes here, although you haven't changed the impervious versus pervious nature of the thing. But you've moved the homes further apart. Now, if that happens, would you be getting into the steep slopes?
Yeah,
And then that becomes even more difficult and less likely.
My point is that there's more consideration here than just the impervious, just the dedicated open spaces, that there's also steep slope on the property, which prohibits them from just, making this widespread and making it much wider than what it is.
So it's in the interest of a more efficient use of the land to keep them closer together.
Correct. And then from a planning perspective, they're demonstrating that this plan is a feasible plan. If they turn around and do something quite different, then how can they demonstrate and justify the variance of disturbing more steep slopes when there is a viable option to minimize them?
May I follow up as part of the same comment? So, and I hear and I understand, and I trust this, this governing body and the planning board to result in something that looks like that. I don't know the developer, so yes, they could sprawl it out. But I don't trust people coming 10 years later, a whole different boards, whole different committees. If they've just got this 40% open space and we're counting everything, then they could still, build in between the units, they could still sprawl across, and 30% impervious surface is still 9 acres of impervious. So it could look like very differently from that diagram over time. And I think that when we're doing a rezoning, it's meant to stand the test of time. It's not just meant to get us through this developer and this development and the next homeowner association. It's meant to really stand. So we don't have to go through this process in 10 years' time again. So I really think that we can work out the numbers that if we raise the open space aspect of it, the developer will still be happy because they're getting what they're showing us, so they should be happy. And we'll get peace of mind that we won't have to go through this again, that the community will get what we think we're getting, and that no one on the committee or open space or administration has to explain, well, it didn't quite work out that way, and we're sorry, we thought it would, and anyway, so, thanks again.
Thanks, Joe.
Frank, can I, kind of building on Joe's question there, wording it in words that resonate with me, is that he's saying that there's a vagueness right now about how we define open space, it seems to me. The developer was very upfront about they're viewing open spaces including the grassed area between units. And they're saying that adds up to 70% as a plus. But could that come back to bite us at the end if we have a zoning ordinance requirement for 40%, and they then, or a future developer comes back in to say, okay, now we are really going to count that grassed area between the buildings, and that frees up all this acreage out here by the periphery that can now be developed. And how do we protect ourselves the best on that?
Mr. Kelly, I realize you directed that question to the planner and not to me, but let me read to you the section. Let me read to you the section of the ordinance that deals with open space. And it specifically says, there shall be provided a minimum of 40% of the entire tract for common open space, which shall be deed restricted against future development and managed by the homeowners association. Said open space shall not contain any impervious surfaces, detention facilities, and other structural or infrastructure improvements. That's one part of the ordinance, and you've got to read that part of the ordinance with the other sections that have already been referred to regarding impervious surface and coverage. And you've got to read that also with respect to the building setbacks and the distance between buildings. The managed by the homeowners association does not mean that the homeowners association or the developer can do anything they want in that area. What it does, it's, as the first part of that clause says, it's deed restricted against future development. So it's a restriction. Neither a developer, a property owner, or a homeowners association can build on that in the future, but it's managed, the burden of maintaining that as open space is not on the township, but is on the homeowners association. So what you have there is a balance between keeping open space, having it maintained and managed by an association, and the deed restriction will be memorialized in a document which will be required by the planning board, which sets forth many provisions of how that open space is to be managed. So this provision sets the framework for how the open space is, how much of the open space is going to be maintained, and how it's going to be managed. So there will be a follow-up deed restriction. Again, that is not uncommon. You see most of this, and I think within the last month, you approved a conservation easement. And that was a conservation easement, I think, at 43 Susan Drive, and it's the same kind of document that will be utilized to preserve. In that case, I think the emphasis was on the steep slopes. In this case, it will be, the emphasis will be on maintaining the existing property as it is. The planner for the developer may have misspoken. I don't think he was using 70% as open space. I think what he was saying is that there will be green space, the total of which is 70%, and that includes areas between the buildings, lawns, front lawns, back lawns, side lawns. So he was referring to the more generic term of green space. The ordinance requires 40% of open space, not subject to any impervious surfaces, detention facilities, or other structural or infrastructure improvements. And you have to look at that in conjunction with the other sections of the ordinance. It works as a unit.
Albert, let me ask a follow-up question because I think it could put my mind to rest. When that deed restriction is placed on it, is it going to just refer to 40%, or is it going to be referred to boundaries and geographic areas?
It will refer to boundaries
Perfect.
and geographic area.
Okay.
There will be,
That's all I needed to know.
When you purchase your home, there was attached to the deed a meets and bounds description. A meets and bounds description is a border of your property. Here, there will be a meets and bounds description of the conservation area.
Perfect.
And that will be attached to the easement document or the conservation document. Your township engineer, in this case, acting as the township planner, will review that deed restriction. Will compare that deed restriction with the map. And it fits together. Okay. So it's again, the ordinance sets the framework, the planning board implements, and a deed restriction is not unusual. And as I said, you do that in the normal course. It's a condition of approval, and Mr. Rushke has input on what that land looks like. And I know I'm rattling on more than I want to or usually do, but John, I think, wants to say something.
Yeah, and usually what's deed restricted is a large, uniform area that is not immediately adjacent to the buildings. Because adjacent to the buildings, a person may want to add a generator, or they may want to expand a patio or do something minor to a building, and then if it's deed restricted, they can't do anything else. Because even in Valley Estates, there's occasionally someone wants to put a generator in or expand the patio or do something minor. So that's just being very impractical of restricting every square foot of open space. We're probably within a very minimal distance in the rear of the buildings, the whole rear slope. It'll be a very large area that's going to be deed restricted, but it's not going to be right up to the buildings. That's
Good.
just not.
Thank you.
And one additional question. In terms of wetlands, if a letter of interpretation is required in order to move forward with this development, that is another deed restriction that is placed on the property. And that is a deed restriction that comes from the Department of Environmental Protection. So there, you may end up with more than one deed restriction here depending upon the conditions in the field, conditions which remain to be fully established. Is that correct, Mr.
Yes,
Rusher?
as part of our primary checklist, they are required to get an LOI, and they will. I know that they have investigated the wetlands, they did some preliminary delineations, they've assumed 50-foot buffers, and they've assumed riparian buffers, and so they have taken this into consideration with their concept plan. They just didn't get the formal LOI to substantiate. But they have done they have hired an environmentalist and someone that did basically do the legwork to request an LOI.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your time. Jennifer McNally, 19 Ferndale. And this will be a tough act to follow with these questions. But a quick thing is the gentleman who sat here before, who now have gone, I understand the deal has not been finalized. It's contingent to the zoning changes to close. Is that correct, right? The transaction?
I have not seen the contract.
Mm-hmm.
I do not know what the contract says.
Okay.
But that is not an unusual provision.
Okay, which I think is interesting. Okay, yeah.
It's not an unusual provision.
Right, so it's still been, because it follows my question then. So I did some research on the Chatham Township website about the whole Geraldo Farms issue. And I know we partnered with Morris County, right, to work on the Geraldo Farms purchase. Would there be an option for us here to partner with them again for something like this? Like to replicate what we've done in the past? Would that be something like, since this is contingent to closing, or we don't know the exact, if this transaction has actually occurred, would that be an option for us to pursue as a township? It's private property.
There's a contractual relationship between the property owner and the developer. The property owner is bound to sell the property to the developer. The developer is bound to sell the property, buy the property. There would have to be no contract in existence for the township to do what you're proposing.
Okay, so with the zone, we don't know if it's closed yet or not, but is it contingent on their, have they already bought the property, depending if it gets zoned or not? What's the?
I have not seen the contract, but as I said to you, it is not unusual to have a contractual provision making the purchase contingent upon rezoning, approvals, whatever the two parties agree to, but that is between two private parties.
Did we ever examine something like that when this whole sort of thing first came around a while ago or not?
As was said at the last meeting and
I was
earlier
at the last
tonight,
meeting,
that was explored at the same time that the township was buying the Geraldo or participating in the purchase of the Geraldo Farms, and the town and the Har family could not come to an agreement. They moved forward.
So even if Morris County, we've talked to Morris County about partnering at all at that point or not?
Those discussions were had at that time when Geraldo Farms...
But Morris County was part of it?
Well, there was part of the process when those two things came up at the same time.
Okay, that's all. All right, thank you for clarifying.
Just to clarify what went on, we were in the process of negotiating for the purchase of that property and the Geraldo property. We filed applications with the County Open Space Committee for funding. We wound up withdrawing the application for the Dixiedale property to basically put all of our eggs in the basket of the Geraldo Farms. We did not have the resources to pursue both. We were asking for a $10 million grant from the county, which we got. And if we were asking for $10 million plus another one, we felt that it would hurt that other application. So it didn't go any further.
They didn't do a 2-for-1? No.
Pardon me?
They didn't do a 2-for-1 deal?
I still didn't
They
understand.
didn't do a 2-for-1 deal? Yeah.
Yeah, there was no indication that would have flown.
Oh, but thank you, thanks, good, thank you.
Come on up.
Really quick, I promise.
fact, one of my questions was already answered by Mr. Kelly. Thank you. First, just a general comment. I did notice a few technical errors in the document. I don't know if that matters or not in terms of the process, but just for example, section 13B2 refers to 13K. It means to refer to 13L. No idea how much that matters. Just as a point to you guys, there are a few reference errors in the document.
Hold on a second.
Sure.
Which one are you referring to?
Section 13B2 that talks about the contingencies allowing the low-income housing basically says it's going to be 54 units unless as specified by section 13K. I believe it means to say 13L because 13K is about hedges and 13L is about low-income housing or affordable housing.
You're looking, which is the section that needs to be corrected?
So section B2, which is on the second page, top part, says maximum density 2 units, yada yada, except as provided in section 30-7813K. But if you look at section K, that's about landscaping. I believe it means to actually refer to section N1, which is about affordable housing. So probably while it was being edited, I guess, paragraphs were added. I did not do a complete reading. It's possible others exist as well.
If you would share your notes with us before it gets published, we can make sure that all the corrections are made.
No, we're going to make that correction tonight.
Okay. And then
Thank you
just
for that.
2 other super quick points. On the skate park zoning, I noticed that there's not any zoning proposal for the skate park. Is that already zoned for affordable housing, so it's not required, or is that going to be put in later?
The skate park is already part of an affordable housing zone. It already has zoning on it.
Perfect.
It has
Okay.
also been declared an area in need of redevelopment. So
Okay.
a new ordinance called a redevelopment plan will be considered at some time in the future that will act as the new ordinance for that skate park.
And that's not being considered at the same time as this ordinance, even though they kind of go hand in hand, same developer, same
Correct.
idea.
It's not part of tonight's discussion. It's not part of tonight's discussion.
Okay. So I guess back to my earlier comment, since they do go hand in hand, it might make sense to have them in together. The last point, another resident mentioned this about cutting Hillside Avenue. That was a serious idea that the mayor of Chatham Borough discussed with some residents that were concerned. I think it's a reasonable solution if there's going to be a lot more traffic generated and this developer is unable to move the entrances to River Road. It could be a solution where there is like a 50-foot stretch of road that doesn't have any driveways on it or turnoffs or residences right now. It's a pretty natural piece of land. If you had to cut Hillside, that's where you do it, right on the town border.
Thank
So
you.
I'd recommend reaching out to the mayor of the borough.
Yeah, it's been done. We've done.
Would trucks be able to access Hillside if they were only able to come from the cemetery and not come in off of River Road?
I guess
Given
that would
the
be a
problems
step.
with the overpass down on River Road, trucks coming from New Providence?
The other entrance on Hillside is just on the other side of the bridge, so they could if they came down Watchung and turned on. But I guess that would clearly call for a traffic study. Thank you.